Good morning, bon matin. On International Women's Day, welcome to this unique sitting of the Daughters of the Vote. We are meeting on traditional Algonquin territory. Bienvenue à tous et à toutes.
Welcome to all of you. Welcome to the House of Commons.
Sarah Dobson. The Honourable Member for Halifax West, who will be acting as Speaker of the House of Commons today, along with Jordan Plain, the Honourable Member for Simcoe North. There she is. Who will be sharing the role, as I do, with Deputy Speaker Bruce Stanton every day. We are gathered here for this special event because of the vision and efforts of Equal Voice, an organization dedicated to electing more women to all levels of political office in Canada. The objective to know when to pause, don't I? The objective of the Daughters of the Vote initiative is to encourage Canadian women to become familiar with our country's political institutions and those who serve in them, with the aim of inspiring them to participate in the world of politics, whether on the local, provincial, or federal level. Jamais on n'aura vu autant.
We have never seen so many women here within the House of Commons.
Je suis confiant.
I'm fully confident that thanks to the efforts of Equal Voices, the Daughters of the Vote will bring more and more women into the House of Commons as members of Parliament.
And this great endeavour to secure electoral equality for the women of Canada could find no greater champion than today's keynote speaker, the Right Honourable Kim Campbell, 19th Prime Minister of Canada. There's more. Hold on. A lawyer by training, Ms. Campbell first became drawn to politics on the provincial level as a member of the British Columbia Legislative Assembly. A couple of years later, she entered federal politics as the Member of Parliament for Vancouver Centre. It was not long before she was appointed to Cabinet, serving as Minister of State for Indian Affairs and Northern Development, Minister of Justice and Attorney General, Minister of National Defence, and Minister of Veterans Affairs. When Prime Minister Brian Mulroney announced his retirement from politics in 1993, Ms. Campbell entered and won the race to succeed him. In so doing, Kim Campbell became the 19th Prime Minister of Canada, the first woman to attain that position. en sa qualité de Premier ministre,
As Prime Minister, she immediately rolled her sleeves up and got to work reorganizing the cabinet and campaigning across the great nation for the upcoming federal elections, which were to be held a couple of months after her candidature.
Popularity placed her as Canada's most popular Prime Minister in 30 years. But politics being what it is, a new government took office a few months later. Thankfully, she continued to serve. Over the years, Ms. Campbell's career has been as diverse as it is distinguished. If I were to list her contributions to the advancement of women, to international politics, to global democratization, to academics, and even to musical theater, there'd be no time left for her remarks. And we can't have that. Parmi ses nombreuses réalisations,
Among her numerous successes, she has written her autobiography, which has been a true success, has been Consul of Canada in Los Angeles, and has taught at Harvard. She has chaired the World Council of Women Leaders, a network of women who have been presidents or prime ministers.
she has harnessed these remarkable accomplishments, as well as her personal and professional experience, to serve the greater good. And we are all the richer for it. It is an honor and a thrill to welcome her back to the House of Commons. Je suis enchanté.
I am truly pleased to introduce to you the Right Honourable Kim Campbell.
Thank you so much. Merci mille fois.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. I think it's the first time since I left Parliament, since I left political life, that I find myself here once again in the House of Commons.
It is a glorious sight to see you all here. I cannot tell you. It is so touching. And I know that over the coming years, this sight of young women filling the seats is going to become more and more natural. We will make room for our male colleagues. We won't take all of the seats. We'll share. Women do that. But this is a remarkable and very touching vision for anyone who has served in this chamber. So you are making a lot of people very happy and very confident in our future. We're running a little bit late this morning, so I won't give you a long address, although as the speaker commented, I do have a memoir called Time and Chance, which is now on Kindle, so anything I don't tell you, you can read there, and it will tell you some of the story of my political career. But it is also interesting that I am addressing you directly, because in the House of Commons, we normally do not speak directly to other members. We speak only through the Speaker. So I would be saying, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I should say, I'd be interested to advise the members of such and such, or the honourable member to such and such. So I want to say just a little bit about life in this chamber and what it means to be a member of Parliament. And incidentally, I hope you've all found your little écouteurs, your little earplugs, for both for hearing better and in case we launch into another language. Another thing that I'm not doing is I'm not reading a speech, because it is in fact the tradition in Westminster Parliaments not to read, except for your maiden speech. You may read your maiden speech. And I kind of was thinking about whether the term maiden speech has with it a certain gender quality that we might want to think about. But anyway, your first speech in the House, you may read from a text. But after that, the tradition is that you do not read from a text. And when somebody raises a point of order that the honourable member seems to be reading his or her speech, the honourable member may reply, Mr. Speaker, I am only using copious notes. One of the greatest parliamentarians of all time was, of course, Sir Winston Churchill, who was a great writer. In fact, he supported himself as a writer, he used to compose his speeches at night and memorize them so that he would not break the rules by reading from a text in the British House of Commons. But it is interesting because this tradition of speaking extemporaneously and on your feet develops great orators. And it is interesting to me that Americans are often very surprised at the quality of oratory that comes from Canadian and British politicians. And it's because that's the discipline that we have to learn. We have to learn to be able to think on our feet. And the idea is you're not reading a speech because you may have to respond to the point that was made just by the previous honourable member attacking your ideas or attacking your legislation. There are other rules. I am doing something that I never did when I sat in the House of Commons. I am wearing a pantsuit. This may surprise you to know that when I was a member of Parliament 20-odd years ago, business dress is the dress that you're supposed to wear. And women never wore trousers in the House of Commons. We can thank people like Hillary Clinton, Angela Merkel, whose uniform is a jacket and trousers, people who have regularized and normalized jackets and trousers for women in politics and women political leaders. So when you come to the House of Commons, you will have a choice as long as you dress appropriately and respectfully in a business-like way for the House of Commons. You can wear other things. The other thing you will never do in the House of Commons is refer to other members by their name. You lose your name here. You are the honourable member for Timiskaming, the honourable member for Vancouver Centre, the honourable member for whatever the name of the constituency is. And to be actually named in the House of Commons is a great disciplinary action by the Speaker. So we are only known by our constituencies. And one of the great feats that speakers perform early on in a new parliament is to amaze and confound us all by calling a roll call vote and calling the names of every constituency attached to the people sitting in the House of Commons. It's quite wonderful to see if you ever come to an opening of Parliament here. The other thing is we also do not refer, maybe it's even hard for me to even say it, but the other House of Parliament is never referred to by name in this chamber. It is always called the other place. I'm not quite sure what the origins of that are, but the S word is not used in this House of Commons. Heckling is also something that is standard in the House of Commons. Some of you may want to throw out a heckle here or there. Although when you have your maiden speech, the convention is that someone giving a maiden speech, their first speech in the House, is being offered the courtesy of not being heckled. C'est aussi très intéressant, très important, because
It's also very interesting and actually very important that we have simultaneous interpretation here in the House. Since 1959, we've had simultaneous interpretation. It's great because it allows us to have conversations, live conversations. In the Cabinet, the Executive Council, well, they also use simultaneous interpretation. And it really shows just how professional our interpreters are. We've never had any leak that has been traced to them. They're highly honorable professionals. However, it does lead to a few challenges.
I was actually honored to give the address and reply to the speech from the throne, which was the first speech in the new Parliament in the fall of 1980. No, I guess it was in the fall of 1988. And I had written a text, because I was allowed to, for that speech, and it was meant to be the speech in reply to the speech from the throne, so that it had to deal with themes that were in the speech from the throne. And I actually told a joke. I actually quoted Pierre Berton. I was talking about the balance that we have in Canadian society, which led a famous author to say that a Canadian was someone who could make love in a canoe, which was probably a pretty naughty joke to tell in the House of Commons. And I got a few giggles. And then about 15 seconds later, there was hearty laughter. And I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized it was the translation. It was the Francophones laughing once they got the translation. So when you are speaking in the House of Commons, you may want to time pauses to allow the translation to do justice to your humor. I also was horrified to discover when I left Parliament that I had been the test for the translators. I am trying to speak slowly to you now, but evidently, on a dit que si on peut traduire, Madame.
It was said that if one could interpret Mrs. Campbell, one could interpret anyone.
One final comment about language. I had a French teacher, and incidentally, when you come to Parliament, you have the opportunity to learn the other language, and please grasp that opportunity if you have not already had the chance. We're living in a world now where you can do French immersion if you're from English Canada. There's lots more opportunities than in my day. I came to revive my high school French. But there are many opportunities to learn the other language. Prime Minister Chrétien arrived in Ottawa as a 29-year-old member of Parliament not speaking a word of English. He learned his English here in Ottawa. My colleague Benoit Bouchard also arrived in Ottawa in 1984 not speaking a word of English and was made parliamentary secretary to the Honourable Don Mazinkowski, who spoke not a word of French. And they became great friends, which may give you a different view about how necessary it is to speak the other person's language in order to get along. But Benoit Bouchard became very fluent in English by the time I arrived in Ottawa in 1988. So there really are resources here. And what that means is, and you heard this said earlier by some of the other people who've addressed you, the opportunity to get to know your country, to get to know your countrymen and women and to understand them, to share in their culture, to share in what they do. I can't make a recommendation necessarily to learn Indigenous languages, but they are used in the government of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, and the opportunity to learn them, I'm sure, will grow as we have more Indigenous people in the House of Commons, and I think our translation policies may well grow as a result of that. The other barrier, of course, to understanding, aside from language in our country, is distance. And many people come very long ways to sit in the House of Commons. And over the years, efforts have been made to try and make that easier. In some ways, it was easier before air travel was so common, because members from the House of Commons would come to Ottawa and usually stay for 6 months and actually do the work and then go back to their constituencies. Now we expect parliamentarians to go back and forth and be available. And my constituents in Vancouver Centre could never understand why I couldn't come out for an event on Wednesday night. No, I couldn't. But we changed the rules so that on average 1 week in 4 we didn't sit. And we've tried to find ways. We did away with night sittings. So we tried to find ways to make the life in Parliament easier. And I think the increased number of women, and it isn't just women who want a saner life. Men also want to go home to their families. Men also don't want to stay up all night, drinking and playing cards because they think there might be a vote at 2 in the morning. The civilizing quality of life in the House of Commons benefits everybody. It is not something just for women, but women may sometimes be more likely to speak up and say, why are we doing this? This is ridiculous. And one of the challenges that I think you will face as members of Parliament, that you will be able to grasp, is to figure out how to use technology to maintain the capacity of people to work in a collaborative way, knowing one another as much face-to-face as possible, without making a terrible barrier of distance, because one of the things I think that does keep women from standing for Parliament when they come from areas that are far away is the prospect of the travel, is the challenge of disrupting their families, of trying to figure out how they would physically manage it. And this is something that I think women have to address. Everyone has to address, but many of you can take the lead on doing that. The other thing I want to say is that people in the House of Commons, somebody once said that off the Hill members of Parliament were nobodies, and that's the opposite of what is true. When you get to know your colleagues, sometimes you'll be invited to go to their ridings and speak at their riding associations, particularly if you're a minister, but not only that. And you will discover who these people are and why their communities have urged them to seek nominations. And it is a wonderful thing to see. I remember when I first came to Parliament, we had night sittings because we had to get the Canada-US free trade legislation passed. And so we would sit up and have dinner in the parliamentary dining room, and I would sit with colleagues from my party and kind of listening to the war stories of things that people had done. And it was a wonderful way to feel part of a culture and a history. And one of my colleagues was a member of parliament named Bill Kempling, who represented Burlington. And Bill Kempling was absolutely spherical. And when he was telling stories, Bill Kempling had been a very successful businessman in Burlington. And when we would be eating up in the parliamentary dining room, I would always notice that Bill Kempling would have 2 pieces of pie because he was spherical. Wonderful man. But then I discovered that Bill Kempling was a war hero. Bill Kempling had walked 1,500 miles through the jungles of Burma in World War II, where he was fighting, that he was a man of incredible courage and incredible distinction. But even more so, a year later, when the Emperor of Japan died, and there was a big controversy about whether the Governor General should go to the Emperor's funeral, given the history of the war, I heard Bill Kempling on the CBC talking about having taken something from the body of a dead Japanese soldier when he was in the war. And it was a flag that had writing on it. And he'd taken it as a souvenir. And when he got home, he realized he shouldn't have taken it. And he made efforts to find out who it belonged to. And the person it belonged to had died, but he made efforts to find out if there was any family. And there was a sister of this soldier surviving, and he took this flag back and met with her and gave it to her, and she was so happy to have this souvenir of her dead brother, because the writing were the names of all of his friends who'd attended a going-away party before him. He'd gone off to war. But what was so interesting is that as all this controversy was raging over whether the Governor General of Canada should go to the funeral of the Emperor of Japan, because I think he wanted to be at another event that was dealing with veterans here. Here was Bill Kempling, who had been in that war, who had seen the worst of it, who had walked, as I say, 1,500 miles through the jungle in combat to survive. And he said, these Japanese are not the same people that we fought in the war. And by all means, our Governor General should go to do honor to their emperor. And to have that generosity of spirit, that forgiveness, that willingness to move on, he had such credibility in saying it. And this was my pal, Bill Kempling, Member of Parliament for Burlington, the totally spherical 2-piece of pie eating person. And I thought, I am honored to serve with him. And there are many such stories that you will find when you get to know members of Parliament. People, you don't know their stories here, but when you explore them, you will find people of great character and great distinction, and people who come here for one purpose only, and that is to serve Canada. I don't have time to go into all sorts of things about things that I learned about being a woman in my time after political retirement, but there is a lot of wonderful literature about things like implicit attitudes, the way in which who we think gets to do a job depends on who we see doing a job. And so when I was Prime Minister, I didn't look or sound like anyone who had done that job before. And for a lot of people, particularly the media who covered national politics all the time, there was a disconnect. Even though intellectually they may have felt that a woman should be able to do this, viscerally, I didn't fit their mold. And this kind of implicit bias is something that sneaks up on people, and we all have it. We all have it. It keeps us from giving someone the benefit of the doubt. We look for reasons to justify that discomfort we feel when somebody who's not prototypical is doing that job. So for your own well-being, you need to learn about this stuff. There's a lot of good stuff written about it. You need to understand what you might be encountering when for reasons you don't understand, you're not getting the benefit of the doubt. But it also explains why it's important for you to be here and for women to take their places. Because we get our sense of how the world works from the landscape in which we function. And if our landscape doesn't include women parliamentarians, if our landscape doesn't include women leaders, women managers, women directors in all of these different fields, women conductors of orchestras, then when we see a woman doing that job, we will feel uncomfortable. And so what we need to do is change the landscape. And sometimes for the first people who take those steps, it can be painful. But we gradually change people's assumptions about who gets to do the job and what is the natural order of things. So I want to say that One other quick thing is that when you come to Parliament, you will be a politician, and please don't let anybody ever tell you that being a politician is not an honorable thing. I traveled the world working. People around the world would kill to have what we have in many countries. And people can be dishonorable in any walk of life, but those who make democracy work are those who will guarantee our liberty. And I just want to finish by saying that quand j'étais Premier ministre, j'ai eu
When I was Prime Minister, I had a French teacher.
And at that time, there was a lot of discussion, you know, was I Madame le Premier Ministre or Madame la Première Ministre? And Pierre insisted that I should be la Première Ministre since I was the first. So we had some stationery printed. And on the top of that stationery, it says, Prime Minister, Première Ministre. Now, I wasn't in office very long, so I didn't get to use all the stationery. And I think that somewhere in the Langevin block, perhaps in an old stationery cupboard, because I don't think they throw much out in this government, there is a box of stationery waiting for somebody. And I hope one of you will use it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your inspiring words, Ms. Campbell. We will now hear from some of the honourable members gathered here today. As is custom in the Chamber, the Deputy Speaker and I will refer to the members by their riding name. The honourable member from Eglinton Lawrence has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, qu'est-ce que la francophonie?
What is a francophonie?
Coming from a French-speaking background or familial heritage. Although I will not neglect its colonial legacies, la francophonie has become so much more than its traditional definition. As a woman of color from an immigrant family, la francophonie is a unique part of my Canadian identity. J'ai appris que l'une des forces de
I learned that one of the strengths of my country is the way that diversity is shared and discussed, thanks to communication and to the languages we speak here in Canada. I was the first person in my family to learn French, and this has opened opportunities to me, such as the one to give this speech here today. This government should make the francophonie more accessible.
Opportunities to a more diverse group of Canadians, namely immigrants and minorities. But more importantly, to make space for a new intersectional dialogue about how identity and culture intersect in this country. Thank you.
The honourable member from Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
This past year, almost 15 years after my family and I had immigrated to this country, my mother was hospitalized for depression. And one of the greatest deterrents that discouraged her from seeking out treatment many years earlier was the fact that she felt that no doctor, no specialist could understand her very particular experience as a woman, a single mother, a visible minority who had immigrated to this country. We sought out translators and consulted with doctors to provide her with the best means of support available. But the fact is, she does not stand alone. 6.64% of female immigrants fall into depression, with women having higher rates of depression than men across all socio-demographic factors. Our communities, although equipped with certain services, still have much to be desired in terms of bolstering visible minorities as well as female immigrants and to empower their voices. I am so proud to be my mother's daughter, and we need to support women like her so that they can share and inspire us with their stories and their experiences. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Jacques Cartier Portneuf. Today, I rise to speak on behalf of women who are incarcerated in federal penitentiaries. Indeed, they often don't have a voice because they represent a minority within the penitentiary system in Canada. However, women inmates have specific problems. 29% of the women in prison have mental health problem. 86% have been victimized, either psychologically, sexually, or otherwise. And 94% of the women have addiction problems, either drugs or alcohol. These problems require special resources to deal with mental health problems. However, due to a lack of resources in penitentiaries, cell segregation is often used, and this has a very devastating effect on women's mental health. We need to be more inclusive. We have to put more resources into helping these women, help them fight poverty, and get alternations, find an alternate to segregation. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm here to end the silence and stop the violence on university campuses. It's estimated that 15 to 25% of women in North America will be sexually assaulted during their degree. Rape culture is not a new phenomenon, yet many institutions do not have intersectional sexualized violence policies, trained staff, or a designated person to report to. Institutions have prioritized their reputation over the lived experiences of survivors, as many refuse to disclose sexual assault numbers online. Only 1 in 3 Canadians understand what sexual consent means, yet many campuses are lacking consent and bystander intervention training. We need to be addressing these education gaps earlier in our education system, while also creating communities of care where we believe survivors, even when our legal system and our institutions do not. We need to reform a legal system that consistently delegitimizes and dismisses survivor stories and only convicts 2% of assailants. We also need to stop stigmatizing and blaming survivors. It doesn't matter how much she drank or what she wore. The fault lies squarely with the perpetrator of violence, period. Lastly, to all survivors here today, I want you to know that I support you, I stand with you, but most importantly, that I believe you. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. International Women's Day is a time to celebrate organizations such as Equal Voice, who are working tirelessly to increase the number of women elected to political office. Yet at the same time, it is essential that we acknowledge the work that still needs to be done to address the gender gap that exists in Canadian politics. Girls Just Wanna Not Run, a report compiled by Jennifer Lawless and Richard Fox, compares levels of political ambition between young men and young women. Based on a survey of college students, they discovered that young women are significantly less likely than their male peers to have ever considered running for office, to express an interest in a candidacy at some point in the future, or even to have considered elected office a desirable position. These findings tell us that gendered norms discouraging women from pursuing careers in politics are being internalized at a very young age. I call upon my fellow delegates to become mentors for young girls in elementary and high school. Let's inspire them to get involved, let's encourage them to run for class president, and let's ensure that they understand that they too are daughters of the vote. Today on International Women's Day, we may all be daughters of the vote, but tomorrow we must remember that only a quarter of this chamber will be. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Centre.
Madam Speaker, right now there are thousands of youth and families accessing community resources across Canada. They're accessing them in search for support regarding mental health, basic needs, and among other things, they're searching for a community where they feel they can belong. I cannot explain how important these communities are and how important these resources are to our families and our young people. However, due to funding cuts, organizations and programs are shutting down, while many other communities have none at all. We need to do something about it. We need to support our communities and support our young people and our families so that they know that they're supported, but they also know that they have a voice and that they're here with us together as a family.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Madam Speaker, let me just begin by saying it is such an honour to be representing my hometown riding of Thornhill and to be addressing the House of Commons today. 2017 is a very important year for Canada. We will be marking our 150th birthday and reflecting on our history as a nation, celebrating our diversity and our values as Canadians. It is also an opportunity to reflect on Canada's role on the international stage and its growing importance in the current political climate. Madam Speaker, we have seen a shift in global values. Throughout Europe and the United States, anti-immigrant and anti-refugee sentiments have grown, and international efforts to curb climate change and promote humanitarian efforts are at risk. As an intern at the United Nations headquarters, I see the daily impact Canada has on UN peacekeeping missions and climate initiatives. Canada has long served as an example of what a diverse and free multicultural society looks like. However, we must now do more. Madam Speaker, for the first time in our history, the international community is looking to Canada for leadership. As we approach our 150th birthday, we must do more to instill and uphold Canadian values at home and abroad.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Granville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to take a moment today on International Women's Day to recognize the gravity and the urgency of the climate crisis and its disproportionate effects on the lives of women, especially women of colour, poor women, and women in developing countries. As a young person, I, like so many of my fellow delegates, am deeply worried about this issue and how it will impact our lives and those of future generations. Climate change is an undue inheritance left to our generation, which will impact all aspects of our society going forward. Though I have absolute confidence in the ability of these other young leaders to tackle this issue and develop innovative solutions, I would like to recognize here today the injustice of the climate crisis and the burden that decades of past Canadian governments have placed and continue to place on the shoulders of the next generation of the youth represented here today in the House of Commons.
The Honourable Member for Nickel Belt.
As we all know, we're here today to celebrate the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. But I think it's important to take a moment to recognize that this is just the anniversary of the right to vote for some Canadian women. It's even long longer before Asian Canadian women, before women in detention centers, before women living on reserve, and before women of color were allowed to vote in Canada. Only 69 years have passed since Asian Canadian women were granted the right to vote. In our history, Asian Canadians have been subject to head tax, have been interned in both world wars, and have built the Canadian Railway with their lives. As I stand before 338 inspirational strong women, my only hope is that we do not forget the mistakes of the past, and we work together to move forward together in progress. Thank you.
The honourable member for La Prairie. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Dear delegates, this is a privilege. We live in a progressive, open society. We have a duty to recognize when this is not so, when it has not been the case historically. Today, I would like to speak about the responsibility of being inclusiveness. We must recognize plurality. As a representative, we have to reaffirm the importance of dealing with systemic inequality in order to make sure that our policies reach their goals. It is not acceptable, Madam Speaker, that in our country that one woman who wears a scarf has at least one unfortunate experience. They are approached in the street. They are eliminated from the public space, a public space that is becoming increasingly more hostile. Think about the repercussions of this debate on what's going on today. There is discrimination, intersectional, systemic discrimination. We must talk about this reality. We have to really put ourselves in this political reality. We have to not deny that this is going on, and it causes withdrawal. This is the only way that we will be able to develop institutional tools to deal with these problems. Sometimes, Madam Speaker, denying that an injustice has taken place hurts more than the actual injustice itself. Today, I would like to talk about the discrimination about people who suffer from discrimination against blacks, against Islamophobia. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker. Anin, today I stand on the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin peoples, just like another young girl did almost a decade before me, to ask the government to equitably fund Indigenous education now. Shannon Gustachin, at 13, simply asked the government for a good education, but she sadly never got to see that come true. First Nations schools on reserve receive 30% less funding per student compared to off-reserve schools, and their schools are often in need of repair or they don't exist at all. This government has promised to close that education funding gap, to enact the TRC's calls to action, and to implement the UN's Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The UN The UN states that Indigenous peoples have the right to education without discrimination. Underfunding Indigenous education is racial discrimination and is not acceptable in this country. I will keep fighting for Shannon's dream, and I ask each and every one of you here today to keep fighting with me. Miigwech.
The Honourable Member for Cardigan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The UN has indicated that in order for women to be considered a critical mass capable of having an impact on policy and practice in government, they must gain a minimum of 30% representation in legislative bodies. Our Canadian Parliament has still not reached this critical mass index, and our current electoral system is hindering women's progress in our pursuit to achieve equal representation. Electoral reform is a clear and tangible way that we can make steps towards a Canada in which all voices are equally represented. Extensive research has shown that certain electoral models more effectively promote the election of more women in political office. Party-list proportional representation systems in particular incentivize parties to run more diverse lists of candidates and therefore are the most successful at getting women's names on the ballot. I believe wholeheartedly in the importance of reforming our electoral system to create the most fair, democratic, and engaging system possible. The fight for electoral reform is not over.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last semester, I studied the case Tanujaja versus Canada, which asked the government for policies to ensure Canadians have the right to adequate and affordable housing. I was furious to learn that this case was thrown out before even being heard by the Supreme Court. This case resonated with me because when I was young, my family faced a precarious living situation, resulting in my mother and I living in a women's shelter. We eventually moved into state housing and have been living in housing insecurity ever since. I believe that this outcome of the case is endemic of a larger systemic issue in Canadian politics. We don't talk about the P word, poverty, or the H word, homelessness. I find it troubling that every federal election cycle, policy debates are directed primarily to the middle class, with little to no mention of policies affecting households. In my writing, 45.5% of residents in tenant households spend upwards of 30% of their incomes on shelter costs alone. This leaves families like mine in a continual cycle of poverty. We must ensure that the charter right to life, liberty, and security of the person is a right we can all reasonably have access to, regardless of income level. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Medicine Hat, Cardston, Warner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As a conservative and as a feminist, I'm considered an anomaly. Within the broader contemporary discourse of Canadian politics, conservatism has been associated with an old boys club mentality, implying that women play a lesser role in the party structure. With the existence of feminism in the mainstream and many stigmatized associations with the word feminism itself, it is imperative that conservative parties break this stereotype as an old boys club. As conservatives, we must demonstrate open hearts and tenacity on women's issues. We must be a party that treads cautiously on reform-based populist ideology that promotes undifferentiated citizenship. We must be the party that celebrates her and represents her through effective policy changes and innovation like Just Act proposed by our leader, Rona Ambrose. We must elect female leaders. We must bring new life to Canadian feminism.
L'honorable député de Longueuil.
The honourable member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
Poverty is sexist. Half of single-parent families led by women are in poverty. Urban homelessness disproportionately affects women. They are more likely to be sexually assaulted, and they struggle to find the supplies when they're on their periods. Poverty is also a rural phenomenon, as there lacks good economic infrastructure in lots of parts in the country, especially with our sisters and brothers on reserves. How do you solve poverty? You give money to the poor. Guaranteed income is a general name for various schemes that give a living wage to those in need. Our society struggles to recognize the value of unpaid labor. It could recognize and support single parents, caretakers, a lot of whom are women, and also seasonal workers, volunteers, students, artists. It could provide a safety net for the most vulnerable in our communities. It could lead the way to a more compassionate and creative society. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A famous Chinese proverb says, "Women hold up half the sky." But how are women supposed to hold up half the sky if they've been left out of the economic development model? Given that 1.3 billion women worldwide are denied access to financial institutions, expanding access to markets is crucial to decreasing the gap between men and women. The reason for the gap can be attributed to insufficient capital, patriarchal and cultural norms, lack of financial literacy, and an absence of recognition by foreign intermediaries. Though discrimination is most prevalent in developing countries, the absence of intensive research in this particular field and the lack of access to venture capital networks, which continue to be largely male-dominated, persist in Canada. In North America, women account for only 8.6% of venture capital leaders. Being excluded from the venture capital network means that women have to work harder than men to gain access to similar financing sources. Through the introduction of necessary skills and education, business models such as formal and informal microfinancing, and the design of efficient outreach strategies, countries, both developed and developing, can greatly expand the number of women-owned enterprises, facilitating tools that allow for growth and ultimately ensure that women hold up half the sky, like the strong, deserving, and powerful forces they are.
The Honourable Member for Carleton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My entire family has, their education was a big part of my family, and it was expected that I would do the same. But my entire way through the education system, I was faced with challenges and hoops because I have a disability. Sorry, I'm nervous. This needs to change because our education is on the back burner. education is put on the back burner because there's no system in place to help us be properly accommodated. They've jeopardized our future, and that should not happen. There needs to be more funding in place to properly train the EAs. There needs to be proper training in place and proper funding for people so that we can be properly accommodated. Every day is a fight. Our education shouldn't be.
The honourable member for Pierrefonds.
Moi-même issue de l'immigration.
I am an immigrant. I came to Canada 7 years ago. Today, I stand here to represent women who are in visible minorities and who face racism as a daily fact of their lives.
Le Canada est une société multiculturelle.
Canada is a multicultural society. Thus, Canadians who come from Central Africa is not exactly the same as the lives of Canadians who were born here. No, rights should be universal. And the very fact that equality is not shared equally around the world is even worse than in Canada. People who are immigrants who come here feel that they haven't the same power as others. Often they aren't prepared as well to really take on the duties of their new freedom here in Canada. This is an issue that all people should take care to deal with, men as well as women, the different levels of the state and politics, and immigrant families who come in here should have their awareness raised. They're not used to the same system of values as Canadians. They might not necessarily know how to take advantage of being Canadian when they arrive.
The honourable member for Nunavut.
Madam Speaker, first off, I'd like to start with it's an honor to be here to advocate for people in my territory. As an Inuk who has grown up in Nunavut, suicide is no stranger to myself and those in my territory. We all know it way too well. We are put into and now live in foreign systems that do not work for us. We need support and allies to assist us, work with us, and most importantly, to listen to us. We cannot face this problem alone like we have been for so long. There are many factors that contribute into suicide: lack of or poor health care, housing, living costs, and transportation. Many live in poverty. Many live in poverty, and mental health care is almost non-existent. We are often left on the back burner, ignored, or forgotten. Nunavut Mi'kmaq have been asked to make a plan Nunavut Mi'kmaq have been asked to make a plan to help ourselves in these systems we do not understand. All we are asking for is our basic human rights. Where is this support from leaders with power and ability to make change. Where are our non-Indigenous allies? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member from Guelph.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, with social and economic inequalities growing across the globe, many of us are inspired by the notion that it is possible to do business on a human scale. This concept is called social innovation and fundamentally blurs the line between traditional for-profit and not-for-profit sectors. Just like any other business, social enterprises generate profit, but the key difference is the way that the profit is used. Social enterprises operate to tackle an outlined social or environmental challenge, like climate change or global poverty. This is embedded into their operations. Today, there are many organizations that self-identify as a social enterprise. There are 10,000 in Ontario alone. Each of these businesses are striving to create sustainable solutions that put people and the planet first. Unfortunately, in Canada, modern-day social enterprises don't align with any existing policies. This is causing us to fall behind on the global stage. That is why I challenge us to think about how we can not only embrace, but enable social innovation in Canada in the pursuit of a better tomorrow. Thank you, Madam.
The honourable member for Banff Airdrie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Looking back on 100 years of women's suffrage, I invite us to examine how our roles in promoting access to our rights and their extension to others evolve. For our cultures to shift, we must push for our collective freedoms. The fight may be incremental in its change, but it should not be incremental in its applications. 28 years ago, Canada accepted my family from Southern Sudan as war refugees. Southern Sudan is now embroiled in a new civil war, creating one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. Over 1 million people have left the country, most being women and children, and had my family not been granted refuge in interest of preserving the integrity of human rights, I would not be here today to take my seat in the House of Commons this morning. Canada is welcome to my family, an extension to me. Canada's welcome to my family is a testament to true Canadian and feminist values. To use the term universal human rights, we must commit to concerted efforts of assisting our most vulnerable. That includes the priorities of immigrants and women of color, as primary issues in the push for equality, along with minority genders and identities. Our freedom is bound to that of our neighbours, and if another can't have appropriate access to their rights, I can't consider myself truly free either. Thank you.
The honourable member for Orleans.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When I was 9 years old, I immigrated to Canada from Nepal. I can personally attest to the fact that leaving one's birth country and one's family and friends behind is perhaps one of the most difficult things to do. Let me be very clear. No one immigrates to a foreign land across the entire world unless one's own land lacks security and opportunity. Promises more hope for the future than one's own nation. No parent risks their children's lives withstanding cold and hunger unless that is the only way of survival. I'm proud that Canada is a world leader in accepting immigrants with open arms. We understand that immigrants and refugees come with immense knowledge, experience, talent, and skills. We see Canada's differences in beliefs, values, and religion as a strength rather than a threat. Our recent offer of asylum to 1,200 Yazidi genocide survivors is a living proof of Canada's leadership. I call on the Government of Canada and the rest of the delegates to not only be open and accepting, but to provide the resources needed to fully utilize the immense capabilities for everyone's benefit. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Madam Speaker, Islamophobia is a heavy word in today's discourse, but it is heaviest for those who are on the receiving end of it. As a Muslim woman of color, in a time of overwhelming stigma, I fear being othered, profiled, and killed in a country I call my own. My identity is challenged, and my actions are heavily scrutinized. I am simultaneously silenced into shame while being expected to apologize for the actions of a small group of people that do not represent me or any... We are all shaken from acts of terrorism, but they affect our communities most because they divide us from within as well as from other Canadians. Whether we have been contributing for generations or whether we're new immigrants seeking refuge or opportunities, we are Canadians. We all have... We all have a responsibility to challenge a growing culture of ignorance rather than justifying xenophobia and prejudice under the veil of free speech. My heritage... My heritage is not a political platform to campaign on unless cherished... unless cherished as complex and as rich as its people. This is my Canada, and there is no seat for hate here.
The Honourable Member for York Centre.
The need for menstrual leave to be implemented in Canada's leave manual policy. There are many countries that already practice it and recognize it. I'm tired of the sexist stereotypes that allow doctors to not view our pain as valid. A lot of women who experience extreme menstrual symptoms and disorders are often forced to go into work and school to avoid awkward conversations and simply because there are no policies to protect us. We shouldn't have to bear pain for the sake of men's comfort. If these symptoms were associated with any other illness, we all know you'd most likely get sick leave. Canada is viewed as a progressive country. We make up 50% of the population. This should be represented in policy. Now, there was a time where maternity leave was viewed as impossible and unnecessary, but menstrual leave does not have to be the same.
The honourable member for d'Argenton-La Petite Nation. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Despite the fact that we live in a relatively open, equal society, it's false to believe that all women are dealt the same hand of cards. Because of their appearance, because of their ethnic belonging, because of their socioeconomic situation and other factors, not all women find themselves in a good situation. They are a large part of our society, but they are often ostracized. In a democracy, it is absolutely essential that measures be taken to ensure that the experience of all is taken into account when we design policy and government programs. The opinions of these women are very important, and it is important that they be given a place in our political milieu. And in order to do this, we have to understand the challenges facing them, which are not necessarily the same as those of women in more privileged positions. We have to change our policy to help these women.
Thank you. The honourable member for Labrador.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Algonquin territory that we are on. Inuit Tapiriits Kanatami's National Inuit Suicide Prevention Strategy is both valuable and necessary. However, with the Inuit suicide epidemic, we mostly hear statistics and preventative measures, but very little personal accounts. In order to truly understand this issue and help us Inuit make change, Canadians and the Government of Canada must honour the Crown Inuit Agreement and listen to the voices of Inuit that want to be heard. Today I will tell my story. I don't want to kill myself. If I say that enough times, will it become true? 2 weeks before writing that journal entry, I, an Inuk woman, attempted suicide. One of the only things I remember about that day is how my brother was there to love and support me. Monday, on the day of the Indigenous Forum, was the 7-month anniversary of my brother's death by suicide. My story isn't the only Indigenous story about suicide and mental health. We know the statistics. The most high-risk group of Indigenous peoples and everyone in Canada is within Nunatsiavut, young male Inuit. They are 40 times more likely to die by suicide than the national average. This is just my story. The stories of Inuit affected by suicide are just as valuable as the statistics, and our voices need to be heard.
Nunavik. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Avalon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Please take this time to consider, why is sex work criminalized? This is a notion we often accept without critically reflecting. By criminalizing this industry, we as a country are putting thousands of women's lives at risk. The punishable act of purchasing services from a sex worker leads directly to exploitation, as safe Johns are less likely to purchase services. This, therefore, results in riskier clientele. Additionally, women become unable to control their own working conditions. Sex workers are further victimized if they are sexually assaulted, as law enforcement officials also often hold them accountable. Further, the stigma associated with this industry often results in their narratives being ignored. It is time that we listen to those who have lived experience and decriminalize the world's oldest profession. We need to stop policing sex work and follow New Zealand's model of the Prostitution Reform Act. Decriminalization is not legalization. Decriminalization removes all criminal penalties associated with sex work and thereby places an emphasis on human rights. This will allow sex workers... This will allow sex workers to work safely and on their own terms. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cloverdale, Langley City.
Madam Speaker, the rule of law has long been recognized as an essential ingredient of social justice. But justice remains out of reach for many individuals, especially those who experience economic and social disadvantage. As a core tenet of the rule of law, equal access to justice is crucial to ensure fairness, promote peaceful conflict resolutions, and maintain public confidence in our justice system. It has been well documented, however, that even though we enjoy one of the best legal systems internationally, we're experiencing considerable access to justice deficits in Canada. But I don't want to bemoan our shortfalls. What I'm here to say is that if we're serious about improving access to justice in Canada, then I think we have to adopt a greater sense of urgency to foster innovation and better integrate technology in our justice system. In BC and abroad, we have seen excellent advancements of online dispute resolution mechanisms and digital resources to provide legal self-helpers with tailored legal information. And I think that these systems should serve as models for anyone who wishes to improve access to justice moving forward. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Perth Wellington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am very proud to be representing my riding of Perth Wellington. Since Confederation, the percentage of Canadians living in rural areas has dropped from 80 to 20% of the total population. The landscape of Canada has radically changed, and rural communities are getting left behind. Rural communities provide necessary support for important industries such as agriculture and manufacturing, and it is important that they receive adequate funding to maintain vital infrastructure. Municipalities collect only 12% of total tax revenue, but 57% of infrastructure is municipally owned, leaving municipalities reliant upon transfer payment and grants from the federal government. The federal government should be cautious to avoid concentrating infrastructure spending in large urban centers. Maintaining essential infrastructure is necessary to the livelihood of these small rural communities and the industries that they support. Thank you.
L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges.
Canada is known to be a role model country when it comes to human rights and immigration. This country has become a safe haven for members of the LGBTQ community who are seeking refugee from their countries of origin. However, we need a representative to speak for members of the LGBTQ community, whether they be Canadian citizens by birth, through immigration, or they're here as refugees. We need someone to assure they receive the proper education regarding their health and sexuality, to address mental health issues directly affecting their community. And to put forward a plan to develop a safer space across Canada. 30%
of the LGBTQ and 90% of LGBTQ people have attempted suicide. More than half of the LGBTQ are suffering from harassment. These people need spokespersons so that Canada will be a model. With an official representation, we can help these people to develop in health in Canada.
Groups have equal representation, and I thank you for letting me speak on behalf of the LGBTQ community.
The Honourable Member for Whitby.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would just like to say that I believe that Canada has made some great strides when it comes to sustainable energy, of which I benefit living in the Greater Toronto area, where I 99.999% of the time have access to reliable electricity. However, energy poverty is an issue for many northern communities, especially Indigenous. Most of these remote communities being too far away from the grid, transmission lines are just not an issue. So they have to rely on diesel generators, which are neither clean nor cheap nor reliable. As someone who really believes in the potential Canada has for clean energy, we need to find a solution for this. There is some progress being made through partnerships for government help to provide some off-grid energy systems via hydro, solar, wind. There's even talks about more geothermal and small nuclear. However, is this progress being made fast enough? So, Madam Speaker, I would just like to say that I believe that governments can and should accelerate the development of these sustainable off-grid technologies. Energy poverty is one of many issues that these communities face, but I believe this is one great place to start.
Je tiens à remercier tous les
I wish to thank all the members of Parliament for their interventions today. It's an honour to have with us here today the Leader of the House of Commons. I now ask Mr. Réal Fortin, the Leader of the Bloc Québécois, to address this Assembly.
Madame la Présidente,
Mrs. Speaker, Madam Speaker, and Prime Minister, dear colleagues, dear daughters of the vote, allow me to first and foremost applaud you for your involvement in your communities. It says so many good things about our society and our future. I particularly applaud those who are at the riding Rivière du Nord, Mrs. Marot. A special applause for her. Thank you. We shouldn't take the International Women's Day lightly. It's not only a day to remember the past, to remember the pathways taken by women in the past and all the work left to do and all the common phrases that we tend to hear so often. No, this day is a day of struggle for equality between men and women, something we haven't yet accomplished. There certainly is work left to do. In Quebec, the very theme of the day chosen by the collective 8th of March is equality without any limits. It's a very good objective. It's really a call to action because obstacles and barriers to equality between men and women, there are so many of them left, far too many of them. So we need you. You are those who will break through the barriers, those who will overcome all obstacles. Every step you take leads us all forward. Equal pay, you move forward, we move forward. Fighting poverty, you move forward, we move forward with you. The struggle against discrimination and violence, you take a step forward and we all step forward with you. A modern democracy, a more equal and generous and collective society without violence is something that can be built by women with women. We need you in our courts as judges, as lawyers. We need you in our universities as professors and as students. We need you in our hospitals as nurses, as doctors. And we need you everywhere. And that is what will open the pathway into our future. We need you in politics, as ministers, as members of parliament, as prime minister.
On a besoin d'entendre votre vision.
We need to hear your view of things and your vision of the world. We need to have you develop new projects for our society. We need to have you stand up to defend their profound beliefs with a new view of reality. I'm very happy to be here with you, to see you all gathered in the House of Commons. And if I were told that you were all here and you're never going to leave, I would be very happy to turn my seat over to you.
femmes.
338 women at the helm. That sounds like a really good idea. It really is something that allows us to foresee a better future. So don't hesitate. Take your place. Get involved in your communities and gain experience. Share your ideas. And thanks to you, help us all move forward together. Who knows, perhaps someday, thanks to all of you, we will have equality without any limits for all.
I now invite Ms. Elizabeth May, Leader of the Green Party, to address the members.
Merci.
Thank you.
I acknowledge we stand on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin of Golden Lake, Miigwech. I want to share with you all, and we're all told to keep our remarks a little shorter so we can be here in this House and then resume in time for question period. But I wanted to share with you my March 8th, 1980 story. International Women's Day of 1980 was the day when I, as a waitress and cook who, due to family financial reverses, was unable to finish or even get into undergrad. So I had no undergrad degree. I'd been waitressing and cooking for almost a decade in my family's restaurant on Cape Breton Island. I'm looking for who's sitting in the honorable member for Cape Breton-Canso. That was where I lived. And I went to hear Rita McNeil sing at a pub in Sydney. Now, Rita McNeil was then not known as the friendly, lovable, everybody's favorite singer from Cape Breton. She was the radical feminist singer from Cape Breton. And so at this big event at the pub in Sydney, which was a 2-hour drive from home, so it was a really big deal that we were going, I ran into a lawyer who said, "Why aren't you a lawyer?" And I said, "Well, I don't have an undergrad degree. It's all kind of hard." And she told me, "Well, don't you know there's a mature students program?" I called Dalhousie Law School the next day. By September of that year, I started my first year at law school with the Speaker of the House, a member of Parliament. just to say, women helping women and mentoring is key to our success as women. And as the Right Honourable Kim Campbell has already shared with you, sometimes even women carry the stereotypes of what women can do and what they can't do. I have a great story. The Prime Minister of Norway in the 1980s, Gro Harlem Brundtland, was the first woman anywhere around the world and the first Prime Minister around the world to appoint a gender-neutral cabinet. And I applaud our current Prime Minister for doing the same. But what Gro Harlem Brundtland did was change the culture in Norway. And by the time she stepped down as Prime Minister, she'd been Prime Minister of Norway for over a decade. And a friend of mine from Norway recounted how her daughter, watching the leadership race to replace Gro Harlem Brundtland, looked at the candidates, many of whom were men. And her daughter looked up at her and said, "You mean, Mommy, a man could be Prime Minister?" So I'm going to try to say this without crying, because I need to tell you that I think we made a mistake in the Daughters of the Vote planning. Because with all of you here in our seats, all the members of Parliament who should have heard all your words weren't in this room. To point out, however, in the gallery, il y a quelques députés qui sont...
There are a few MPs who've trickled in, and clearly they support women's rights. Thanks.
To the honourable member for Labrador and the honourable member for Nunavut, we hear you. Youth suicide demands our attention. Who spoke to the issues of new Canadians, and particularly the vulnerabilities for mental health for the women who come from other countries. Thank you for the statement on climate change. And I can't remember your writing, but oh my goodness, thank you. You made me cry, and I haven't gotten over it yet. I want to acknowledge the Daughter of the Vote for my writing, so you know where I sit. Could you stand up, the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands? The honourable member for Cardigan, you are right. The fight for electoral reform is not over. And for the rights of education, for First Nations kids, for Shannon's dream, while you are standing over there, let's hear it for the rights of trans women in Canada. Who spoke so passionately for the rights of education for disabled youth. These are rights that must be accommodated. So, with 30 speeches of 1 minute each, I can say that I shared with my colleagues back here, and I think all of us will agree as members of Parliament, you outshone us. You showed us the way. You spoke from the heart. And we need your voice every day, until you take your places as elected members of Parliament. We need your voices. Thank you so much. Happy International Women's Day.
j'invite l'honorable.
I invite the Honourable Thomas Mulcair, leader of the New Democratic Party, to share a few words with us.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Speaker and Right Honourable Kim Campbell, Mr. President Jeff Regan. Mr. Speaker Jeff Regan, first and foremost, welcome home, ladies. As usual, allow me to begin by acknowledging that we are on Algonquin unceded territory and that Ottawa still hasn't paid the rent on this land.
Joyeuse journée.
Such a happy day and happy International Women's Day to you. Thank you so much, and thank you to Equal Voices for having organized this extraordinary day. There are certain days in our lives as parliamentarians that remain forever in our memories, and this day will be, for me, one of them, a true turning point in the history of the Parliament of Canada. Welcome, and thank you for inspiring us as much as you do.
Vous me permettrez de saluer.
Allow me to recognize the presence of Madame the Deputy MP of Outremont, Madame Coeur d'Acier. Thank you for being here with us today, Marie.
You know that in the 100 years since some women in Canada won the right to vote, much has changed. Yet we know that enormous, persistent barriers to equality for women and girls remain. In Canada today, women continue to earn only 74 cents for every dollar men earn for work of equal value. And that fact has remained largely unchanged over the last 30 years. That gap exists in every province and every major occupational group, despite the fact that in most of those professional groups, women have been by far the largest cohort of the professional faculties, and it's still men that occupy the highest rung on the ladder. And as many of you pointed out in those extraordinary speeches that we were able to share with you, the pay gap is deeper still for racialized women and Indigenous women in Canada. New Democrats know that there can be no economic justice for women without pay equity. It's as simple as that. And that's why we're so proud to be the party that stood up to fight Stephen Harper's attack on pay equity in 2009, where he introduced legislation, believe it or not, to impose fines on unions that filed pay equity complaints. And that's why we in the NDP continue to call for the immediate introduction of proactive pay equity legislation. Pay equity is a right. Women have waited long enough. No more stalling. La lutte pour l'égalité.
The struggle for equality remains our first order of business for all of us. Quebec has been a good leader, but the high cost of child care services and their inaccessibility continue to be a barrier to equality here in Canada.
State visit to Sweden. And during a meeting at their parliament with people from Ottawa, the question was asked by one of the Canadian participants, why is it that in Sweden, at every level, because we were there in Parliament, but we were meeting women who were at the highest level of that government, but the same applies in business and in every sphere of life, how come we find so many women occupying the higher rungs in Sweden? The answer was as spontaneous as it was unanimous. Daycare. Quality. In our society today, we know that it is almost always women who make sacrifices in their career when it comes to raising children. That's still true today. And those sacrifices carry through for your lifetime. As you try to pay back student loans, as you try to catch up on the wage gap that you should be at in your profession. We still profoundly believe that quality, affordable childcare is a right. Equality must be more than rhetoric. It is the role of women and men who sit in these seats every day to put in place the policies that actually support it, that make it real. Yet we cannot speak of achieving gender equality in Canada when Indigenous women are 4 times more likely to go missing or be murdered than non-Indigenous Canadian women. Or when women and children in more than 70 First Nations communities cannot drink the water that comes out of their taps. Or when an 11-year-old girl in a Northern Ontario First Nation feels so profoundly hopeless that she ends her own life. The struggle to end colonialism and promote reconciliation is profoundly intertwined with the struggle for gender equality. And we must work side by side with our Indigenous partners as we walk this path every single day if we are to achieve it. Sans aucun doute.
Without a doubt, the work before us is enormous. And as we try to advance the cause of equality, women here and abroad will face difficult days, days of frustration. However, we must always remember that we cannot reach true equality with words alone, but through action, through commitment shown by ordinary citizens, by women like you, and by action, resolute action, committed action on the behalf of the state, which has to play its essential role.
For equality is a long one, and that real, lasting victories are often hard won. You are already a critical part of that fight. Thank you for being here today. You can count on New Democrats to stand and fight alongside you for gender equality every single day, because we know that a woman's place is here in this House.
like to introduce the Honourable Rona Ambrose, the interim leader of the Conservative Party.
What an amazing day this is. Are you guys having fun? Yeah? You look fantastic. Madam Speaker, it's wonderful to be here with all of you. I was just backstage listening to your energy, and it's just amazing to see all these young women taking their seats in the House. It really is phenomenal. And I know that you're all here taking your respective seats, but if I could just mention the person taking my seat, who I'm very proud of, Haba Mahal, if you could stand, who's our leader of the opposition. Today, she's the leader of the opposition. Now, it's International Women's Day, and I could not be more excited to welcome all of you into the House of Commons today as equal voices, daughters of the vote. Toute personne qui s'est assise.
Everyone sitting in these seats, you must understand that this is a privilege, and this was a privilege for me too.
This House, and I know many of you will do the same, will tell you that this is a huge privilege, and that's of course true for me as well. And I'm sure the Right Honourable Kim Campbell, who I'm pleased to not just call an inspiration, but a good friend, would agree with me. And there she is. It's wonderful to see you. You all realize that you are part of Canada's great democratic tradition, that you are following in the footsteps of so many others who came before you. Some of them left legacies that shape our political lives today. And I thought I would share with you a little story about a hero of mine and a woman named Nellie McClung. Do you know who Nellie McClung is? So you know your history. Now, I love this story because Nellie spent most of her life challenging traditional women's roles. Now, think of her as a 9-year-old girl in the era that she was in. Growing up in Manitoba, shout out to Manitoba, she attended her first small-town picnic where she knew there was going to be a race, and she hoped to participate in it. She hoped there would be a race for girls. But when she arrived, she realized there wasn't. And this is what she recounted later in her life. She said, this whole question of girls competing in races was frowned upon because skirts would fly up and legs would show. And it was not nice for little girls or big ones either to show their legs. She said, I wanted to know why, but I was hushed up. Well, of course, what nice girls did and did not do was a theme that ran through Nellie's life. So fast forward to 1914. She appeared before Manitoba's Legislative Assembly. At the time, Premier Roblin was in power, to present what we would expect to call the unassailable case for granting women the right to vote. And she made her case. She said, you know, what more do we have to do? Do we not live equal lives? Have we not contributed to the building of this empire? What more do we need to do? And, you know, if you read that speech today, you would think, how could anyone not be moved by it? And Premier Roblin looked at her and said, nice women don't want the vote. But Nellie and her fellow suffragettes, of course, weren't really interested in being nice. They were interested in being equal. That is what they wanted. And God forbid you stand between women and girls who are really looking to have their equal worth and their equal moral worth recognized under the law. And that is what they were doing. So 3 ans plus tard, les femmes...
3 years later, women from Manitoba and Saskatchewan finally received the right to vote, which had seemed impossible at the time.
Women in Alberta, along with those in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, were finally given their due, and they were granted the right to vote. What had seemed impossible was now law. And in 1921, the indomitable Nellie McClung took her seat as one of the 5 MLAs for Edmonton, which is where I'm from. Now, there she continued her work as an agent of social change. She sponsored legislation on married women's property rights and mothers' allowances. And let's remember, these are not things that were talked about before she arrived. And that's the difference about having women there. She had been greeted with ridicule when they asked for the right to vote. And then women like Nellie, now taking their seat in a place like this, faced open hostility from many quarters, being told in no uncertain terms that they belonged at home. But they persevered, and in doing so blazed a trail for the generations that would follow. So we should never, ever forget them, because that seems like maybe a long time ago, but it's not. We should never forget them. And I always say, talking about the importance of supporting women's achievements matters. It matters a lot, but it can't just be fashionable. These women, never forget, these women, whether they sat in places like this or in legislators, they were the women. They were the ones that stood up and fought for the things that advanced women. So never forget that. Now, of course, I wouldn't be standing here today as leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition were it not for women like Nellie McClung. And, you know, as a Conservative, I feel I'm in exceptionally good company because the Conservative movement has a long legacy of strong women. We had, of course, incredibly strong women, and we need to celebrate all of our women that created these legacies for us. We had Canada's first female cabinet minister, Ellen Fairclough. She was also the first woman to serve as acting prime minister. And of course, we had Canada's first female foreign minister, the irrepressible Flora MacDonald. And the first woman to lead the official opposition in Canada was a longtime MP for Edmonton North, the redoubtable Deborah Gray. And of course, we are so proud of Canada's first female Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Kim Campbell. These are the women that make me proud to be part of the Conservative legacy, and no one gave these women special favors. They fought, they competed, and they won their place in history. These women didn't care if people thought they were nice. They were trailblazers who wanted to serve the country that we all love, Canada.
Today, as leader of the opposition, I will do everything I can to carry on with his pioneering tradition. I'm the first woman to be head of the official opposition, and I was the youngest one to be at the cabinet table.
Doing my utmost to live up to this trailblazing tradition. I'm the youngest woman yet to lead Canada's official opposition or a major political party. And I was the youngest woman to be appointed to cabinet in Canadian history. Now, when I was appointed at that time, imagine this. When you arrive, you think, wow, there's so many other women, because you find your people and you can't help but gravitate towards them. But there were only 42 women that had ever sat around the cabinet table before I got there. 42. We could fit you right over here. So think about that. We have so much more to do. And I want you to understand, while you're here enjoying these few days in Parliament and outside of Parliament, that you can be part of that history. So be bold, be courageous, definitely be unafraid, because you do belong here, and you can compete and you can win. There is no doubt in my mind that you can compete and you can win. Now, I'm just going to tell you a little story, because I spend a lot of time encouraging young women and women all across this country to think about putting their name forward for public office. There's something really interesting when I talk to young men versus when I talk to young women, and I want you to think about it. When I talk to young men and I say, you know what, you should think about putting your name on a sign, putting your name on a ballot, you should run in the next election, and they say, sign me up. How do I get in? What do I do? Sounds great. I'd be awesome. Now, when I talk to young women, they say to me, you know, why me? And I have to kind of convince them why they're so awesome. And then they say to me, you know what, first I think I want to get my law degree. And then I think I need to get my MBA. And then I want to work for 15 years. And then I think maybe that'll be the time. And I say, why is that the time? Well, then I'll kind of, but really what they're saying is that is when they'll feel worthy. And that is wrong. Because if you... So think about it. It's a risk, but you have things as young women that you're passionate about and you want to bring to a place like this. You have a place. We have lots of young MPs here, men and women. So you have a place. If you are passionate about wanting to run for office, be unafraid. And think about it. What is the worst thing that could happen? What is the worst thing? You might lose. Guess what? Everyone I've talked to since I've been in politics never talks about that. They talk about the unbelievable experience of running and getting to represent the people that supported them and the amazing team experience they had. And you know what? Oftentimes they run again. No one will remember that you lost. They will remember that you were courageous enough to run. So be unafraid and think about it. Now, the other part of the great part about being in politics is you get to advocate for things that you care about. Now, there's lots of things that I advocate for as leader of the opposition and as leader of the Conservative Party, but I've also had a chance to advocate for things I'm personally passionate about, like my own private member's bill that I just introduced last week, which is something every single private member and member of parliament gets a chance to do. And this is a bill to hopefully create more justice and more confidence in our justice system. And it asks for all lawyers who want to become judges to take training in sexual assault law and rape mythology. Spread the word. We need support. We hope and I think we'll get support from all parties because it's common sense ideas. But I also had a chance to fight for the rights of Aboriginal women on First Nations to make sure they had the same rights as non-Aboriginal women, which the Supreme Court told us they should have had decades ago. And it took years fighting not just the establishment, but even chiefs that didn't want to see this happen. So there's lots of ways in which you can contribute and be passionate about a lot of issues, but also women's issues. So I am incredibly heartened to see all of you here today, and it makes me feel optimistic about the future. I know that you're all intelligent, capable, determined women, and you have a place here in this House. You do. I welcome you. I'm excited to see you here, and I hope you have the best time of your life, and I hope I see many of you back. Thanks so much. Thank you.
I would now like to introduce the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The first one to say this, but this House looks so good with 338 women in these seats. It's something we should all note and aspire to collectively as a society. Happy International Women's Day, and I'm so glad that I and all the other leaders who are here with us today get to spend some of this important day with you. I want to start by recognizing all the important leaders in this House who are here now, MPs, senators, business leaders, community leaders, as well as the great leaders who just came before, Rona Ambrose and Elizabeth May, particularly for being strong examples of women in leadership positions in politics. We need more of them. And I want to also start by recognizing someone who is extraordinarily important to me and who is here with me today, and that's my wife, Sophie. Sophie is a woman who has been a leader in politics for many, many years. She has been a leader in politics for many, many years. And I want to also start by recognizing someone who is extraordinarily important to me and who is here with me today, and that's my wife, Sophie. And that's my wife, Sophie. I have said many times that being with Sophie makes me a better leader. It makes me a better Prime Minister. She challenges me and grounds me, reminds me every day to be open, both open my eyes, open my heart, and to be engaged in the things that really, really matter. And that's an important reflection, and I'm glad that she challenges me and makes me better every day. But on this International Women's Day, I need to recognize that I would not be here as a person, a man, even in this House, if it wasn't for the guidance and the strength and the support that Sophie has given me over these past 15 years that I've known her. She has shaped the person I am and the service I give with everything I do, and she is an intrinsic part of everything that I do in this House and across the country, because I couldn't do it without her. Merci, Sophie. Now, as you know, this year brings us closer to an important historical milestone. It's not only the 150th anniversary of Confederation, it's also been 100 years since some Canadian women were granted the right to vote. Some, not all. In my home province of Quebec, women didn't have full voting rights until 1940, and it took another 2 decades after that for Indigenous women living in Canada to receive the same opportunities. My point is, advancing the democratic rights of women in Canada has always been a work in progress. It's still very much a work in progress. You'll see that for yourself in just a little bit when you have a chance to meet with your own members of Parliament. In 2015, with the election of this House, more women than ever before were elected to serve, 88 in total. But that still represents just barely more than a quarter of the seats in this place. In Canada, women and girls make up just over half the population, but only a quarter of federally elected decision makers. It doesn't add up, and it needs to change. To put things in context, there are 338 women sitting in these seats right now. That is more than in the entire history of Canada that have been elected women MPs. There have been 315 women MPs elected in the history of Canada, and there are 338 of you here right now. We have an awful lot of ways to go, but thank you. Je sais que c'est notre responsabilité.
I know that it's our common responsibility to ensure that this changes. For my part, I wanted to ensure that our government shows the example. We had undertaken to have equal representation of women in our cabinet, and we held true to this promise. When I was asked why we had decided to proceed this way, I said that we were in 2015, 17 now, but there's more to be said than that. After our group was formed, the decision to name as many ministers who were women as men was criticized. Pundits and people who were commenting on the internet would repeat that merit should be the reason for choice, not being a woman. Well, I assure you that merit was the basis of our choice. Indeed, what I'm saying is that the men are lucky that I guaranteed 50% of the seats to them, of the departments to them. Otherwise, we would have had more women. The women whom we chose to serve as ministers were as fully qualified as the men we chose, and perhaps even more so. And the work that they have accomplished since is the clear proof of this. Politics is teamwork, but it's thanks to the leadership of women, of the 3 ministers who are women, that we launched the national investigation into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and it was a woman, Chrystia Freeland, who really settled the trade agreement with Europe, and it's thanks to a woman that we now have a appropriate approach to climate change, the greatest challenge to the future.
Women in Parliament is a work in progress. We know it's going to take a lot of effort on the part of government, of advocacy groups like Equal Voice, and active and engaged citizens like all of you. And that's the good news. It really is. I know when young women like Ariane Morin-Aubu, who's from my riding of Papineau, sitting right there in a very good seat, where we need more women. The Right Honourable Kim Campbell is here as well, but we need more women sitting in that seat in the coming years. There's no question about it. And recognizing, of course, Simone Kavanagh, who is on my Prime Minister's Youth Council, and the many, in representing the many extraordinary young women on that council as well. We know there are young women stepping up in positions of leadership and taking charge right across the country. When we have that, the world becomes a better, more inclusive place. And things like a gender-balanced cabinet stop making headlines because everyone, women and men, take it for granted that women should have an equal place at the table. S'il y a une chose que mes collègues féminines m'ont appris.
My female colleagues have certainly taught me one thing, including Katie Telford, my own head of cabinet, is that we need to spend more time listening and less time speaking, especially when we're men.
Donc sur ce, je vais m'arrêter ici.
So that said, I will stop here to let you take the floor with the questions you have for us. Thank you once again for being here. Thank you for sharing your energy and enthusiasm and ideas with us. I know that we will all greatly benefit from your participation.
That you sitting in this room right now for a few hours will leave a vibe in this room that will imprint itself on all of us who sit here in our daily work to remember to be better, to be more ambitious for our country, for our communities, and to do a better job of being open to both different points of view and the full diversity that makes Canada great. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Now I know we have a few minutes for questions, and I very much look forward to taking them. Speaker, do you want to pick the people who asked the question? There we go. So I'll let you you point out.
Chelsea Montgomery, Wellington, Halton Hills. My question for you is, going forward, you made a promise of electoral reform, and we know that the different... your government has given the reasons of how a referendum can be divisive, how there are multiple challenges, but those challenges, if they were met, would be better and ensure that more women would make it here. Instead of waiting to 2090, and that is the year that it would take if we keep on the path that we are going right now to see gender parity in this House. So what commitments are you making, and what is the plan to go forward?
Excellent. Well, that's a great question and a really important one. It has a number of different elements in it. First of all, how are we going to get more women to run for Parliament? That's a fundamental one that we all recognize. Now, before I could create a gender-balanced cabinet, before it could be 2015, it had to be 2014, 2013, 2012. Because in those years, I went out and tried to convince amazing women to run for politics. At a time where politics was divisive and negative, and there was a lot of nasty feelings about politics, I had to convince people to step up and run forward. And it's always a challenge to get women to run for politics, because when you ask a man if he wants to run for politics, his first question is, when would I start? When you ask a woman if she wants to run for politics, all too often it's, really? Do you really think I'd be good at it? Do you really think I should? There's an uncertainty there, and we need to be better at convincing women to run, convincing people to step forward. And that's something that I take very, very seriously and that we're continuing to work on. Right now, we're facing 5 by-elections on April 3rd to replace 5 seats that have been vacated by men in this House. And I'm very proud that the Liberal Party is presenting 4 out of 5 women candidates in those by-elections. So that's an issue that we can work on in many different ways, and we need to, because we need to make sure that we get many more women in this House. The issue of electoral reform is one that is linked and but is also separate. We need to improve our democracy. We need to improve a lot of things about it. We need to improve the way this House functions so that women who want to have kids and want to be in Parliament don't have to make impossible choices between the two, that we create a better work-life balance, that we respect the kind of contributions that everyone can make and the challenges they're facing. There are changes we need to make there. There are changes we need to make around how politics functions on a broad level. And, as we said, we do need to improve our voting system, and that's why we're making significant changes that are going to improve by reversing some elements of the Unfair Election Act, make sure that people have access to vote. We did talk about changing the electoral system, and it was a commitment that I was very much hoping to be able to do. Fundamentally, my responsibility as a Prime Minister is to do the right things for Canada in the best interests of the country moving forward. And I know there are people who are very passionate about electoral reform, and I'm actually one of them. But at the same time, what was clear to me was that we were on a path that was not going to lead Canada to a good place, that was not going to serve the interests of the country or the citizens that we need to represent. And I had to make a very difficult call to put aside the commitment to change our voting, our type of voting, and move forward in other ways to do that. And I know there are people who disagree with that, and that's what we have elections for. You will be able to be critical of me now, ongoing, and at the ballot box if that's the issue that matters most to you, and I know a number of you will. But I will always make decisions in terms of what is in the best interest of the country, and that's exactly what I did in that situation.
The member for Alfred Poulin in the back.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier Ministre.
Good day, Prime Minister. As of some time, many Canadians face discrimination at the border with the United States.
Voilà, c'est ça. Merci. Excusez-moi, allez-y.
Okay. I'm really sorry. Go ahead. Thank you. What I was saying was, as of some time, many Canadians face discrimination and even humiliation at the border to the United States merely because they are ethnic, of ethnic heritage, or practice a certain religion. I myself don't even feel like going to the United States because I don't feel like being humiliated. So I would like to know how our government can react to this, because it's just an impossible situation. Well, first, Canadians expect Canada to do two things with regard to the Americans. First, continue to defend our economic integration, which leads to millions of thousands of jobs in both countries, while remaining firm, defending our own interests with respect to the Americans and the world, indeed. And that's exactly what we'll do. As for the border, for weeks now, we have been working with the new administration in the United States to ensure that Canadians and permanent residents of Canada have easy access to the borders, fluid passage at the borders, because that remains a priority of ours. This said, we know full well that as a country, we don't want to have any other country telling us how to bring people here, who to accept here, how to handle our borders. A main element of sovereignty of a country is to ensure that you control your own borders. We would never accept having anyone else tell us who we could accept or who we have to turn away. Similarly, I cannot tell the Americans or anyone else how to handle their borders. What we will do, what we are continuing to do, is to ensure that the Americans understand that they need to respect the rights of Canadians. And we wish to continue to easily access the United States via our common border because we recognize that we are a strong country, not affected by our differences, but really because of our differences, and we will protect this and act as a model for the world.
The member for Elmwood, Transcona.
Hi. My question is, obviously for Justin Trudeau. Sorry, I'm kind of freaking out right now. There are 70 Indigenous delegates here, if I'm correct. And so my question is, what advice would you give to an Indigenous delegate here today on facing challenges that will arise once they get into politics? Thank you.
First of all, I want to congratulate all 70 of the Indigenous delegates here today. One of the great things that happened in the last election in 2015 was we saw Indigenous people stepping up and voting in the Canadian political system to a greater degree than ever before. And there was a real sense that Indigenous communities were taking ownership over this process and wanting to be part of the voices that government and this House needs to listen to, needs to hear from, needs to fold into our decision-making in every possible way. And that's a fundamental part of the true spirit of reconciliation that we know needs to come. This room over the decades and its predecessors over the centuries fundamentally failed this country, failed the treaties, the original relationships that we had to respect from the very beginning. We didn't do a very good job of that. Indeed, we did a terrible job of that. We tried to assimilate, to eliminate, instead of listening to, partnering with, and learning from. And we have a lot of work to do in terms of restoring the right path, a path based on partnership, respect, shared stewardship, and a lot of learning to do. And it's not just about the government and Indigenous peoples in this country. It's about all non-Indigenous Canadians too. And quite frankly, the support of non-Indigenous Canadians across this country to get this relationship right, to move forward in meaningful ways, has been extraordinary and has been what has enabled us to make significant steps forward. There's still an awful lot of work to do, and I can guarantee you there will be an awful lot of work to do, not just for the coming years, but for the coming decades. But the more we can get strong Indigenous voices in this House, in politics, speaking up for their communities, engaging with the difficult work of learning a new path together, the better off we're going to be. Because this room deciding on behalf of Indigenous peoples what path is and what solutions are has failed entirely. It needs to be about empowering you to help us build a better future together. And that's the inspiration that I get from Indigenous voices like yours every day. And I just encourage you and all 70 others to keep it up, because it's amazing.
The member for Don Valley North.
My name is Khadija Wasim, and I'm from Don Valley North. As a Muslim, as a Canadian, as a hijabi, I wanted to foremost thank you for calling the Quebec shooting for what it was, which was an act of terrorism, and I really... victimization of always having to condemn after the fact needs to stop. And how long will it take for Islamophobia to be condemned in this House of Leaders? How long will it take? How long will it take for hate that I experience on my way to school as a commerce student at U of T, the effect that I have on the TTC, or on any day when I'm walking down the street? How long will it take for the leaders of this House to recognize that the need to condemn Islamophobia, to condemn the issues that are faced by my Indigenous sisters, are a need of the current time and needs to happen now? One more add-on, sorry. And we talk a lot about mental health, and Sophie does an exceptional job doing that, and I appreciate it. But what about the mental health of our Indigenous sisters and brothers that are in reserves that do not have the same access that I had in urban Toronto that they do not have in reserves? Thank you very much.
On mental health, there is no question that it is something that is both extremely important to me as my mother's son, and I'm so proud of the work my mom's doing destigmatizing mental health, as incredibly proud of Sophie with all her work on fighting mental health and eating disorder issues and just talking about being healthy. But we know that there's an awful lot more to do, and that's why we have set forward billions of dollars for the provinces over the coming years, specifically to address mental health amongst young people. We know that young people have when they have the first challenges with mental health, if they get help right away or in a timely manner, it changes the path in a positive way for the rest of their lives, and therefore for our entire society. This is something that needs to be acted on. It's something we're very serious about, as well as specifically Indigenous mental health as well. There's an awful lot of work to do, but we are finally moving forward on that in a very real way. On Islamophobia, we have been seeing over the past while a rise in expressions of hate and in hate crimes across the country. Yesterday, we had an attack on a mosque in Calgary, but we also had attacks on the Jewish community in the GTA. We have examples of racism, intolerance, and hatred spiking up all across the country over the past months. Obviously, the terrible terrorist attack in Quebec City was an example of it, was a particularly brutal example of it. But we have an awful lot more to do. It may reassure you to know that last fall, this House unanimously, every member in this House, approved of a motion condemning Islamophobia. It was unanimously approved. That was a good measure. It was a moment where everyone came together and agreed. It was a motion by Mr. Mulcair, and we were glad to have this House condemn Islamophobia. More recently, when a motion came forward to not just condemn Islamophobia, but to ask the House of Commons committee to study it, to get into the issues around it and to see what we can do in a very open way about moving forward on something that is unfortunately increasing in terms of intolerance, it has created a bit of a debate. And on one hand, I'd like to think that everyone can all get up and always condemn things that are bad and move on. But on the other hand, sometimes it's useful for people to stand up and disagree, to point out to the rest of us that there's still a lot of work to do. If everyone had just agreed and we'd moved on, maybe we wouldn't be addressing the very scary and real spike in hate speech. Maybe we wouldn't be challenging each other as politicians in the things that we're saying, in the choices we make as leaders to play up divisions and fears. It's easy to try and scare people into voting for you. It's easy to try and say something that's going to pit a neighbor against a neighbor. And if you do it in a sneaky way and use coded language, maybe you won't get called on it by the majority. Maybe you'll get to slip it through. Well, if M103, condemning Islamophobia, actually gets people to notice that there are people uncomfortable with that idea, that there are people who still have problems with the idea that we would condemn discrimination against Muslims, then we have to know. We have to expose that, and we have to deal with it as a society. Because if this room isn't a reflection of what's happening in our streets, in our towns, in our communities, then we're not dealing with the real things that Canadians expect us to deal with. So, do we have a problem with Islamophobia in this country? Yes, we do. Do we have a problem with anti-Semitism in this country? Yes, we do. Do we have a problem in this country with discrimination and hatred? Yes, we do. And we need to talk about this. And we need to challenge each other to be better on this. We need to recognize that we still have a problem because there are men out there who will not say, yes, I am a feminist. We need to recognize that saying and bringing forward truths that are uncomfortable to some, and challenge each other to shift our ways of thinking out of the easy ways we do, to lay open wounds to sunshine and disinfectant. That is also the role that we have in this House and that we have as active, engaged citizens in this country. We need to speak up. The silent majority of good people in Canada who are not intolerant, who are not bigoted, need to know they can be less silent. We need to speak up for the things we believe in. This House and every house across this country needs to be a reflection of that. And I know with the voices that we've heard today in this House, not only is today in good hands, but our future collectively is in very, very good hands. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank all of the party leaders. I'd like to thank the delegates who gave wonderful speeches.
Thank all the party leaders, and I want to thank all of the delegates who made such fabulous presentations. I would also like to thank you, Madam Speaker. And the Deputy Speaker. And I particularly want to thank all of you for being models to my colleagues of decorum and order in this place. Et maintenant, je vous invite.
And now, I'd like to invite you to join your MPs in the adjoining room, in room 237, and for a luncheon.
Members of Parliament for lunch in rooms 237C and 253D next door. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Have a wonderful week.